I actually called a guy one time when we got him in custody. He was in the middle of making a fake treasury check. So it was still up on his computer screen. And he was using Photoshop. And I was like, oh, well, this is how he creates these. Okay, this is very interesting.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Good Question, a podcast from your friends at Inscribe, where we ask the big questions shaping the future of fraud, AI, and trust. I'm Valleskey, head of marketing here at Inscribe, and today I am super excited to be joined by someone many of you in the fraud community already know, Las Vegas Detective Marc Evans. You might know him from Fraud Hero, some of his deeply insightful LinkedIn posts on real-world fraud trends, or even his role as Fraud Fight Club coach, helping fraud fighters sharpen their investigative instinct. And of course, many of you saw his Money 2020 session where he opened with a QR code that a lot of people immediately scanned, a perfect demonstration of how easily trust can be exploited. Before we dive in, I also want to introduce my co-host, Ronan Burke, CEO and co-founder of Inscribe. Ronan's a frequent guest on the podcast and a champion using automation and AI to help financial institutions defend against document fraud. Ronan, welcome back.
Great to be here again.
And Marc, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm glad we got a chance to meet and finally set this up.
Absolutely. The feeling is mutual. I would love to start by hearing a little bit about your origin story. You describe yourself as a seasoned ally in the battle against fraud. How did you end up specializing in fraud and financial crimes in the first place? And what pulled you into this whole world?
So I've always been interested in financial crimes and fraud. I never thought of myself going into law enforcement like growing up. That wasn't a goal of mine, not even before I started college. And it wasn't until about my freshman year in college where I started watching a bunch of shows. Like White Collar was one of my favorite shows.
Love that.
And I thought this is something I can do. And the reason it caught my attention is I love puzzles. And yeah, I think there's not a bigger puzzle than dealing with fraud, especially because you're dealing with people who are trying to hide who they are before they even commit the crime. And for me, if I can solve this puzzle and outsmart the smart people, then it's gonna be a lot of fun. So that's what drew me into it initially. Mm. So I decided to make that my goal. So I applied to be a police officer, and ironically, throughout my background process, I became a victim of identity theft. And
Wow.
so it hit home that I was joining the department to actually be a fraud detective, and here I am becoming a victim of one. And what ended up happening was someone opened up an account in my name without me knowing in another state. And it wasn't until I was going through the background process that I discovered on my credit report, because every credit report is part of the process, that I had a fraudulent account that I owed money on. And if I didn't get it taken care of, I couldn't become an officer. I couldn't join the department.
Wow.
So I had to go through this entire process to fix that before I could even hire on. And then that really pushed me more towards it, because I thought, if this can happen to me and stop me from having the career that I want, this can stop multiple people from doing the things they want to do in life, buying a house, getting a car, getting a
Yes.
career.
Yeah.
And so that passion just grew even more when I got on.
So one of the first fraud cases you had to solve was your own. Wow.
Yeah. Now, I didn't identify who the person was, but I did have to go through the process and learn what
Yeah.
it takes to recover the recovery process. And it's not
Yeah,
easy.
sure.
And so it was taking that into account, knowing that when I speak to victims, what it's going to take for them to actually get through this.
Wow, it's a great origin story, and that's actually the kind of insight that inspired myself and my co-founder to start Inscribe, where Connor actually saw firsthand when he was working at a bank just how much document fraud was occurring. But oftentimes it is these like personal experiences that kind of propel you into a particular area, because a lot of the world, a lot of folks just aren't aware of what actually goes on behind the scenes in like lots of nefarious ways. Yeah, Mark, I'd love to also hear when you, after joining in like the first couple of years, was there like a fraud event or a case that changed your perspective even more or surprised you after having joined, that kind of, again, was another kind of insight that opened your eyes to, what actually happens behind the curtains here?
Well, one of the first cases that I got, and it started off small, but it ended up being larger, was how complex some of these cases can be,
Mhm.
and how it involved how many different types of fraud that one case can involve. And so I had this case that it started out as a check fraud case where someone was using stolen checks that belonged to someone else. And in that case, from a stolen check case, ended up evolving into a mail theft case, an auto theft case,
What?
document fraud. What else was there? Identity theft, forgery, organized crime.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
all of those baked into one. So what I ended up discovering in that one case was the check fraud happened because of mail theft. In the mail theft, the suspects or the criminals were doing mail theft every single day. And their goal was to steal checks, like business checks, individual checks, and they would go use them. But they would use those checks to go grocery shopping. They would use those checks to go cash at various places. They would do identity theft because they would find maybe a stolen ID or create their own fake ID, find someone who matched it or put their own photo on it, and then they would use that to go cash the check. They would do document fraud, and we're going to get into that, where they were creating DMV temporary licenses. They were creating fake bank statements, fake utility statements, and they would use that to go get cars. And those are the cars they're using to drive around to commit mail theft. And then on top of that, you had an entire group that was working together to do this entire thing. And now you have an organized fraud ring that's committing all these crimes. And so to see the complexity of, you have to be able to understand these different types of crimes in order to wholeheartedly take on a case and to be able to explain it later on was eye-opening. Because I would think, oh, somebody got a credit card stolen is very simple. Like the car got skimmed. It was like, no, this is a lot more in depth than I thought it was.
Wow, I love that point. And it opens my eyes as well to when we see a piece of document fraud on the Inscribe perspective, like it's one part of a broader story. And yeah, like as you're saying, it's like for us, for example, we work with lots of fintechs and payments companies, crypto companies and big banks, but they might be seeking access to financial products so they can launder money. And that laundered money might be coming from other crimes earlier, like drug cartels, etc., or buying prohibited items or shipping ammunitions globally and so on. So they need to launder money. And so like what we see is just a very small sliver, but we actually don't know what's happening either side, left and right of it. But it is, in some cases, like it is probably part of a much bigger issue. But yeah, it's just so incredible. On the Inscribe side, it's interesting when somebody tampers with a document, they leave behind tons of cookie crumbs. But from your perspective as a detective, you can catch them at any point of where they slip up. And so, but that means you need to look in a lot of different places. And so it must be like a game, like finding where
Puzzle.
it's up and then a puzzle. Yeah.
It's a
And
puzzle.
then
See, when we see the fraudulent document, we're only seeing perhaps one piece of the larger puzzle that is to be solved. Yeah.
And that's usually the case. I deal with a lot of cases that have involved multiple other things. Like I'm a fraud and cybercrime detective, but I've seen cases that will involve maybe vice or gangs or narcotics or even homicides.
Yeah.
And this is just one part of it. And it, just like you were saying earlier, Ronan, with like money laundering. Fraud is just one part of the money laundering, but where's the money coming from? Is it coming from fraudulent activity itself, or is it coming from other nefarious crimes that they're doing? And this is their way to move that money. So it's a very interconnected world when it comes to fraud. Fraud is the centerpiece, I feel, with a lot of different crimes. And I figure if you could solve that part of it, you can get to the rest of it. So if you can solve where the money's coming from and where the money's going and how they're transferring it, then you can solve the other parts of it.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah. Money is the fuel basically that
Yes.
these organized
Because
crimes.
I was going to also share. Oh, I'm sorry, Ronan. You
No,
finished.
yeah, right.
I was just going to say that my origin story into the world of fraud detection started with my desire to become an investigative journalist, which I was early in my career because I saw All the President's Men as like a 14-year-old. And I thought it was amazing how you could solve the puzzle, follow the money, and uncover the truth in a very meaningful way. So I think that just makes it really makes a lot of sense.
Money goes everywhere. It flows. Most criminals, when they are committing crimes, they have a goal. Usually the goal is something involving money.
Yeah.
Whether you're in gangs, whether you're selling drugs, whether they're doing all different activities, the goal is money or power or both. And usually one leads to the other. So money is always involved.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Ronan, I feel like you have a question. Otherwise, I can jump in. Don't look.
like it's so interesting. From our perspective, we catch thousands of fraudsters a week, and like my mind's just going to now, like like how many of those are like first party fraud, like somebody inflating their income on a bank statement to buy the car they always dreamt of, versus money laundering for nefarious activities, organized crime, human trafficking, drug cartels, etc. Like we don't know, but from your perspective, Mark, do you have a hunch or an intuition of like what's this? I'm not even sure how to treat them, like the seriousness of fraud. Is there like a power law in terms of the impact? And this might come back to the question of enforcement as well, where like you can't enforce all the small cases, but you can enforce, the large cases that have a huge blast radius. Yeah, curious to just get your thoughts on that, because like my mind is I'm just so curious as to what that looks like from your perspective.
And I've talked about this before. So when you mentioned the first party fraud versus like third party fraud, I have seen a lot of third party fraud that looks like first party fraud. So I think there's a big misunderstanding when it comes to first party fraud, because it's not always that way. And a lot of that, I feel like it comes from a lack of education, not just like the training to actually identify what is first party fraud, or like what are the signs or red flags of it actually being first party fraud versus third party fraud. And I can give you good and bad examples. So I'll give you a great example that I worked with someone who's a friend of mine now, that she's at a credit union. And it was an actual first party fraud incident, to where this individual went to a casino and they got a $20,000 marker. But they also filed a report and they said that, hey, someone stole my credit card, and they used the credit card to get $20,000. It just so happened that he had filed a report years before for the exact same crime in the exact same way. And for me, I go, that's a red flag, because there's no way you're getting scammed the exact same way twice, years apart, in the same location for the exact same amount. And it was a very even dollar amount. Like, okay, that's very weird. And unfortunately, the investigator for the credit union saw the same thing. So this is very weird, and reached out to me through LinkedIn, ironically. And we were able to work together, and we were able to determine that this person was actually lying. I had a very nice phone call, what I'll say, with this person to determine whether or not they were actually a victim of fraud, or if there was something going on. And it ended up being this person later admitted that they believe they maybe had too many drinks and they forgot that they did that. That was the excuses. Oh, I'm sorry, I must have forgot. I didn't know that it was me. I'm like, yeah, okay. Filing a false report is against the law. But that was able to not only stop him from committing first party fraud again at that location, because he's banned from that location now, but it also helped with the credit union not lose that money to first party fraud. And that's a story when it comes to first party fraud. But I think now where the other half of it gets misconstrued is when you have actual third party fraud and it's looked at as first party fraud. So you have a true victim of identity theft, a true victim of a bank account takeover, where someone is transferring funds out of their account and they're telling the bank, this wasn't me. And once they do this, and the bank or credit union, we believe it's you because the authorization was approved by two-factor authentication, or you went and you approved this transaction, not understanding the details of how, let's say, a bank account takeover can happen. And so this person's a real victim fighting for their money back. And they have the bank tell them, no, you committed this first party fraud. So I think having to understand that aspect of, or maybe someone was a money mule and they don't know it. So they're not committing fraud. They just aren't aware that someone's using them to launder money or move money in different ways. And I've had a lot of cases that I have dealt with people who were like, they're going to close my account. They said I did this. There's a chance that they could go to jail because they were looked at as a fraudster. Well, having to prove and helping those people, like, look, you're not a fraudster. You didn't commit a crime. You're not going to jail. But we have to prove, you have to give me all the information that's needed in order to show that you did not commit first party fraud. And that's a huge aspect between the first party and third party fraud that I try to educate people on, especially investigators, because it's that little bit of information sometimes can keep someone from losing money and keep someone from going to jail.
Yeah. And so many things that I'm going to follow up on there. But I think the last point you mentioned just kind of shows that how anybody can be brought into this problem without them knowing. Like, you know, some, like, even if you no awareness, like it's after the fact, then you get a phone call saying that, hey, you've been caught up in this, and through no wrongdoing your own or no understanding of like what was actually happening. So it can happen to anybody in terms of being a victim of this. But I think a very interesting you also brought up too, which is like the collaboration between you and a credit union. And it is very interesting where like these departments are catching fraud every day, but how does that workflow typically work where like if they catch 1,000 fraudsters a month, which ones do they decide to communicate to the police about? And then which ones can you work on? And I'm sure there's some constraints here in terms of bandwidth and also the severity of the cases, but like in terms of channel of communication and then the prioritization of investigations, I'm not sure if you can comment on this, but I'm very curious to hear.
No, I definitely can. And so I'll break this down into two parts. So the first part is the collaboration part. Now, I gave an example of what good collaboration looks like. That investigator reached out, said, hey, I need help. I know you're in this location. I've followed you on LinkedIn before. You're reputable. Can you help? Yes, let's work together. I need information from you in order for me to move forward. There are certain things that we have to do, whether it be, hey, I have to give you a subpoena or a search warrant or things like that. But I also need you, if you're the victim of this, I also need you to be willing to share information with me. And that example was good collaboration. Now, let's talk about where collaboration fails or there's no collaboration at all. For example, I once had a case involving a business email compromised, and someone had a lot of money transferred from their business. And this was a wire transfer that went from one bank to another bank. And depending on how fast someone actually reports it, gives us the ability as law enforcement to be able to recover those funds. And those are usually very short timelines. It can be sometimes a few days, maybe a week, week and a half, depending on the amount and depending on the bank. And what ended up happening was the person filed the report very quickly. Like within a day, they're like, hey, look, I was a victim of a scam. I know my money went to somewhere else. I don't know what bank it was transferred to. They didn't have that information. And so I reached out to that bank and said, hey, look, I'm not looking for personal information. I'm not looking for like the name, date of birth, account numbers, anything like that. I just need to know what bank did this money go to. That's it. And good collaboration would go, look, I can't give you all the PII. I can't give you all that information, but it went to X bank. Great. Now I can reach out to that bank and say, I know this transaction happened at this time. Can you just freeze the funds at least or hold the funds? I'll send you the paperwork necessary, whether it be a subpoena or a warrant, to be able to help get that money back or do a hold harmless process where we can get this person their money back. And I've had banks go, no, we need a subpoena no matter what. I go, okay, but by the time I send you a subpoena and by the time you provide the information to me, that money's going to be gone. Because sometimes it's going to take weeks or months before the information comes back. And by the time the criminal has received the funds, they've withdrawn the funds, or they transferred it to some other mean like cryptocurrency or whatever they to choose, and the money's gone and I can't get this person their money back. And this victim did everything in their power to try to stop it. And so I think that becomes an issue with the collaboration part. And now to bring in the second part of that, when you asked about how was it like with volume, getting those cases or the amount or things like that, there's multiple factors that go into play when it comes to being able to investigate a case. Dollar amount definitely plays a role because if it's very small amount, say if it's under $1,000 or whatever the threshold may be, every state and every jurisdiction is different. Some are seen as misdemeanors and some are seen as felonies. And depending on the amount of cases that your agency is receiving, you may not have the resources to handle every single case that comes in, especially some of the smaller ones. It's unfortunate, but it's just the reality of it. And then, so you have dollar amount and then you have volume. I can tell you right now, I'm in a larger city. So we were receiving a year over 10,000 cases.
Wow.
So you can imagine 10,000 cases a year split between 15 to 20 investigators. And that's being generous. Some agencies have one or two investigators to handle all those cases. And some of those people aren't even just fraud or financial crimes or cyber investigators. They're doing property crimes and burglaries and homicides and all these different things at the same time. So they really don't have the resources to move forward with that. You may have jurisdictional issues to where, okay, my victim lives here, but the bank is in another state. And maybe the bank doesn't comply with paperwork or legal documents from this state. That becomes a hindrance. So there's multiple factors as to what can hinder an investigation and what can help an investigation.
Yeah, and it's interesting in our world as well, there's an element of we don't promise that we'll catch all fraud. It's actually more of a minimization game instead of elimination. One thing that we do find though as a byproduct is if you minimize it enough and that becomes clear enough that this bank or fintech has good defenses, it actually acts as a deterrent or a discouragement. But I'm curious if that's also the same in your world as well, where as long as like you have a sufficient number of cases being prosecuted and that being very publicly known, it acts as a deterrent that like, hey, you can't just do this and think that it's going to be easy. You will get caught, or over time, it'll eventually catch up with.
Yeah, and the deterrent with prosecution this can be a delicate situation. I try to be one sometimes. In my experience, when it comes to prosecution, so I think what a lot of people don't understand, so I'll give the whole process of how an investigation and the case works from getting the case to prosecution. I explained the getting the case part already, where if you receive a case, now you go through the process of trying to identify who the suspect is, try to get this person their money back. Even once you identify the person, can you locate them? Are they within your jurisdiction? Are they even in your country? Because we know a lot of fraud is global. And so you have this whole thing where you put together an entire case. So now let's say you put together this great case. You have all the evidence, you have all the documents, you have testimony, you have all this stuff, video evidence, everything. I think a lot of people don't understand that once law enforcement turns in that report, turns in that entire case, it's really no longer in the detectives or investigators' hand. Then it becomes in the prosecutors and the court's hand. And so what happens is in the court, you have some really great like district attorneys who are fighting these cases. And sometimes they need everything from you to be able to strengthen their case, because they're only working off their case based on what you provide them. And so if there's things that they know they're going to need to move forward with this case, they will ask the investigator or detective, hey, can you give me these documents? Can you send a subpoena to this bank and get more information? Because they want to have a very solid case. And then there are times where maybe you have a new district attorney or something who doesn't really understand fraud, or they never had to present and prosecute a fraud case. So now they're learning, like anybody else, they're learning on the job. They're going, okay, I don't understand how this fraud happens. And this is where collaboration between law enforcement and district attorneys are really good, because from a law enforcement perspective, I can help educate the attorney on how the scam actually happened. Because I've had questions from some attorneys who will go, explain this to me. Explain what a counterfeit mail key is. Explain to me mail theft and how that process happens. Explain to me how you know, and we'll talk about this because you guys deal with document fraud. How do you know that this document is fraudulent? Explain that to me, because they have to be able to explain it to a judge and a jury sometimes. And if they can explain how the document is not legitimate, then they have no case, especially if that was one of the primary factors when it comes to it. So now you have the DA who is now either learning or they're very versed in it, and they present this entirety of the case. And then once they do that, it's up to a judge or sometimes a jury, if it goes to trial, to determine if all these factors are enough to say, we are 100% sure or beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed this crime. And then they make a determination of whether or not, are they going to go to jail? Or are they going to get probation? What's going to be the punishment for it? And this is where, as a detective, and this is really why I started Fraud Hero, or one of the main purposes, is because I would work these extensive cases and these attorneys would work really hard to prosecute these cases. But I think there's a lack of education when it comes to how detrimental that these crimes can be to the individual person or to a business. I've seen businesses have to close down. I've seen people not make their car payments or their mortgage payments or whatever it may be because they lost all this money and they didn't get it back. But there's this false assumption that, oh, it was just a paper caper. It was just a money crime. They're going to get their money back. Like, that's not the case. The bank doesn't always get their money back, or law enforcement can't always recover those funds. So while they may believe that this person's getting their money back because they think it's just a click of a button and they transfer the funds back, people are left wondering, why did nothing happen? Like, we had everything go forward. Why? And it's not like their fault. It's just they believe that, oh, they're going to get their money back. So no harm, no foul. They're going to be made whole. Or it's not seen as a violent crime. So a lot of violent crimes get the headlines and everything else. So they're like, no one really got hurt. And they go, no, they got hurt because now they're struggling financially to make ends meet, or they're struggling financially to do all these other things. That hurts me sometimes more than maybe someone, I'm not downplaying like robbery or anything like that, but if someone gets robbed and they lose their wallet or 40, 50 bucks, it's one thing. When someone has their entire bank account emptied out and their entire life savings is gone, that is just as detrimental as if they got robbed at gunpoint. And so that's what makes it really hard for the prosecutorial side. For me, if they were they were tougher on fraud, I think it would make a difference as a deterrent. When it comes back to the deterrent thing, like I said earlier, if there was tougher punishments for fraud and financial crimes and cyber crimes, it would be a bigger deterrent for these criminals not to do it because they get a lot of money from it. So if they can go make a lot of money and get probation, they're like the risk versus reward. And they'll take that risk because the reward is much greater.
I was going to say, I just like really appreciate your passion for victims of fraud and scams, because the complexity of the puzzle of fraud is growing at a rate that's almost astounding, not just the internet and AI, but you have with the accessibility of financial products and the ability to connect with people all over the globe. You get these pig butchering scams that are like a romance scam wrapped inside of an investment scam. And we are all vulnerable at points in our lives. And it's easy to look at victims and be like, how did you fall for that? But those are people who just want love and security, human beings. So I think the work that you do to provide that education, and it's one of our goals at Inscribe too, of course, is so meaningful for the community and especially for victims.
And it's good that you mentioned social, like the whole pig butchering thing, social engineering. How you said it's not just one crime. I mentioned it earlier.
Yes.
It's a complexity of different types of crimes. Like right now, I really specialize in social engineering, and that's my big push right now because I love dealing with social engineering cases because they're so complex. And like I said, I've seen social engineering cases, or these cases where you have romance scam, an investment scam, a job scam, and law enforcement scam wrapped into one. Like, it's never just one element. So they get very interesting when you talk about those types.
Yeah. And just on the talk of such cases, do you have any stories of a very bad like document fraud case? We see document fraud like every day, and just some like very like funny examples and some scary examples. But anything that you've seen over the years that particularly stands out?
So when I first became a financial crimes detective, because I moved over to cyber crimes recently, but when I first became a financial crimes detective, I did not know the extent of document fraud before I started. And I did financial crimes for 6 years. And I would see document fraud every single day. And I'm talking about the fake DMV temporary passes. I've seen DMV titles. I've seen fake treasury bonds that were completely made from Photoshop. I mean, from scratch. I actually called a guy one time when we got him in custody. He was in the middle of making a fake treasury check. So it was still up on his computer screen, and he was using Photoshop. And I was like, oh, well, this is how he creates these. Okay, this is very interesting. I've seen fake checks, completely fraudulent checks, bank statements, documents. And one of the ones that I've seen most common is the DMV information. Because when you apply, I'm sure you guys both know this. So when someone applies to get a car, right, they have to present a lot of information. They have to present their driver's license. They have one, or at least a temporary driver's license. They have to present bank statements for loan processing. They have to, all these different things they have to show, say, hey, this is who I am, and I have enough money to get this loan. And one of the funniest ones that I had was a guy who was going into a car dealership to get a car, and he had everything online. So it was a lot easier for him to send over fake documents that he created because it's all online. And the dealership who was receiving the document aren't doing unfortunately, the greatest verification checks, but maybe because they're not used to it, right? They don't see it or they don't investigate it every single day.
Mm.
And so when we discovered this dealership actually did a good job, and they discovered that the documents, something was off. And so we did this entire thing where we showed up and we pretended to be a car salesman. It was super fun. And, the criminal shows up and they're going through the process and they're signing documents. They're forging signatures right in front of us and they're doing the whole thing. And then we finally get to a point where, okay, we have enough. He signed everything. He did it right in front of us. We know these documents are fraudulent. All right, take him into custody. So we get him in custody. And he was very lighthearted about the situation. I wasn't expecting that. And he's like, yeah, you guys got me. Like, how'd you guys figure this out? And it was one of the documents that was really, this is where it comes into play, really knowing what documents look like. It is, he had a temporary DMV driver's license. But on some of I guess not, the smaller information, like the fine print, it had a governor's name on it, but it was from 2 governors ago. And I go, that's one side because that governor hasn't been in office for 10 years. So this is an old template that he's using. So when we started explaining, this is how we know it's fake, he's like, oh. And we didn't tell him everything because we don't want him to try to improve his tactics. But there was so many different things, like the license number didn't match the font that it should, or it was extra bold, or name didn't match up. There was different things within the templates that he was using. And then, of course, he's signing over documents that even weren't even, and we knew who he was before he even got there. And it was just putting all that together. And he was like, yep, you got me.
Amazing.
So he was very lighthearted about it. But that's one of the things that I've seen. And I see a lot of with car dealerships. That's one of the prominent things that I see. And then banks, of course, people making fake utility bills, and they'll use a real template to do it. And now, I mean, if the technology today was available 6-7 years ago, what is it? I'm pretty sure you know about Gemini's Nano Banana.
Yeah.
And I was playing around with that the other day, and I was like, oh my fucking, what can I change with this thing? And I was shocked at how easy it is to change a document on that. And all you do is put a simple 1-sentence prompt into it and go, change the name from this to this, and it does it. And I go, oh, this is just a whole new level of fraud that's going to come across with a document. I'm pretty sure, I know you're probably well at that at Inscribe. But yeah, those are some of the things I see. But that one was really funny that the guy was just willing to come clean about it after we called him. I see some people who will fight it tooth and nail. No, that's a real document. And that's a real check. And they go, it's not even a real check. It's not even a real account number. You don't even have enough numbers for it to be an actual account number. You know that. And this is those little things that make it fun to have conversations with them. Those are the puzzle pieces I like to put together, and makes my job very interesting.
Yeah, we'd love to be able to see the full extent. We could see the document, but the human aspect of it as well, and the psychology that goes on when you actually talk to them or try to get them in a sting.
You're aware. It's amazing how prevalent this problem and familiar it is to you. That was really what astounded me too when we met at Money 2020. You looked at one of our examples of fake documents and you're like, I've seen these before. And
I remember that because I called it out right away and go, oh, this is fake. Because I started pointing things out and you were like, whoa.
Yes. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about the signals that you as a detective would look at in a document to identify fraudulent signals, because those are some of the heuristics that some of the original Inscribe signals were based off as well. And so my question for you is also, what else do you, when you think a document is fraudulent in your work, what do you do?
So there are certain things that I have to go check. So like a DMV document, I have to look at this is where experience comes into play too, because you have to know something. So like a fake DMV temporary driving permitters, you have to know within your state, what's the normal time frame that this thing lasts? I have one that it lasted a year. I'm like, they don't make fake driver's licenses for a year, or they don't make real ones that last a year. They usually have 30 days, maybe. Or the dates that you look on it. Well, it says this date is for the temporary moving permit, but the date that it was printed out is after the date that their permit would have expired. And they go, well, that doesn't make sense. So it's having that experience. And then just when you're looking at the documents and if something looks off, just question it and go, how can I prove that this is real or not real? Because you want to be able to prove if it's legitimate just as much if it's not. Because you don't want to harm someone who it may be legitimate. And maybe there's a business who's saying, we think this is fake. And I go, no, that's real. And I'll verify it's a real document. Maybe it looks a little off. Maybe the printer was messed up that day or something. It looks a little off, but this is a real document. Everything matches up. I've talked to the DMV. I've talked to the bank, or I've talked to the utility company, and it's legitimate. But it's knowing all those little signs to look for are like common numbers that you see. I forget the name of the theory or the
Benford's Law.
Yes, Benford's Law. So you see certain numbers repeated over and over. They're like, okay, they keep using this same number for all the utility bills. Like every utility bill is not the same amount.
Yes. Yeah.
Unless you're very strict on your like energy usage and hey, I only turn my TV on for an hour every day for this. I only open the fridge up at this time. If you're that meticulous, there may be something else going on. But it's just knowing those little factors. And not everyone has that. And I think that's where something like what you guys do comes into play, because you have to be able to explain how you know it's fraud. It's not enough to just say, this is a fraudulent document. Okay, explain to me how you know it is. But if you have something like yours, I could think, Inscribe, it says, this is why it's fraudulent. It makes it so much easier, not just for law enforcement, but for the courts, like the attorneys and judges, because they can look at it and go, you have this expert who has this software that says this is false, and they have someone who could testify to say, this is why we know it's false, and this is how we can prove it is. Helps so much when it comes to prosecuting cases and dealing with these.
Yeah. And just another example with the utility bill, like we do have a detector which like looks for things like that, and in particular like on bank statements. So if we see like a beginning or ending balance repeated too much, like over thousands of docs, like if it's the exact same match, it's almost like a fingerprint in a way. Like for somebody's name and address, for the bank balance to be exactly the same with the same bank at the same time range, it's like very uncommon. So it's a really good, unique identifier. But those types of things are difficult to catch in isolation, because if you're just working one case, you have to remember what all the previous cases were. Like it's a lot. Like most people just can't do that without the help of technology. I actually do that.
And I'm a fraud. I am passionate about fraud and scams. Like I study fraud at night. People ask me, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm reading up on fraud stories. You're like, what? Like I'm reading on scam news and I'm learning the new tactics and techniques that all these scammers are using because I want to know. I really enjoy like investigating these. So I really want to know, like, how are they going to commit this? Or if I get a new case and I go, I've never seen this before. Like sometimes you have to give scammers credit. You're like, that is good. Like, how did they?
Yeah.
I've had some where I go, how did they figure this out? Or I've interviewed some of them and I go, how did you find this out? How did you figure out you can do this? And a lot of times it's by accident. And they'll say, like, oh, well, we were doing this and it worked. So we just tried it again and we kept improving it. And then it kept getting better and better. So they learned how some new tactics sometimes by accident. So learning those new tactics is very interesting to me, just to see how the different ways that somebody could try to scam another person. And then I utilize that to be able to teach other people and investigators and banks and law enforcement, these are the scams that are happening right now. And this is how they can have it in the future in order to defraud someone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You go, Ronan. I have questions, but you can.
Yeah, and we're getting tight on time as well. But just I do think it's an important thing you mentioned earlier, just around the use of like Gemini, like Nana Banana, like LLM type products. They're making it like much easier to modify documents, but they're also making it easier for fraudsters to like talk to these models and ask them for advice and help of, okay, edit the amount on the document and then like tell me what else I need to change, and then change it for me. And so it's almost like we're becoming like the assistant to the fraudsters. And so the technology is getting to a very dangerous spot. And this is literally like happening week by week now. But we think at Inscribe that like this is going to cause a lot of damage next year as this stuff gets more pervasive. And like there's a big drop in trust on its way in like financial services. And this is across expense reimbursements with receipts, invoices, underwriting, account opening with AML regulations. And so at Inscribe, we're building detectors as fast as we can to catch this. And we're using LLMs and the latest technology as well to try to keep up. But it's a fight that's kind of increasing. And one stat that we're keeping an eye on as well is just the prevalence. So for the past few years, the prevalence has typically been one document in every 20 submitted on a digital channel is tampered with. We're sharing a state of document fraud report, but one thing we always closely watch is like, how is this prevalence increasing or how is it changing? But we expect that AI generated fraud is going to be a very big vector. So yeah, it was interesting to hear your personal anecdotes on the effectiveness or danger of these tools as well.
Definitely be interesting. 2026 will be very interesting when it comes to AI. Well, fraud that utilizes AI as one of their aspects. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've even heard, we just had a customer tell us a story the other day where you can try and look at the website a fraudster has created, call the number on there, and in real time, the fraudster can ask Gemini to be like, generate a script for me to respond to this like investigator, seeing if I'm a real business and like being out legitimate. So the speed and quality is fascinating and alarming at the same time. So we're in a very interesting moment, and it's really interesting to hear from your perspective as well, Mark, not just on the AI generated docs, but the template store economy. Like even in
Yes.
the AI generated arms race, like fraudsters do still love the path of least resistance. And so we still see a ton of like document store templates. We know about these template stores, replaceyourdocs.com,
Yep.
which they have their legal disclaimers that say, oh, you can't use these for anything legitimate. But we know
Then why have it? Yeah.
we know that they are. So why even have it? Even I think those are the two trends that we're going to be watching really closely.
Yeah, going to be an interesting year.
Thanks.
Bree, have we time for more questions or?
I would say you can ask one more and then I'm going to ask the last one.
Okay. I have two questions, but I'll just pick one. In terms of how we should work or just like the vendor ecosystem in general, like what can we do to help more in terms of the police enforcement aspect? You know, one thing we can do, of course, is like, you know, with this podcast, for example, we're increasing awareness, but is there anything else that we can do to help you or the industry and society in general?
With law enforcement, I think, like I mentioned earlier, having the tool available that can utilize, that we can throw a document into and say, these are the ways that we know this is fraudulent, and just like a very simple explanation of how you know that makes it so much easier. Because when you have to write a report, like an arrest report or a warrant or something like that, you have to be able to articulate why you know it's fraudulent. And if you can make it very simple, that helps so much for law enforcement. Because I've written reports. I think the longest report I've written was 61 pages. There was so much detail that I had to be able to explain for when an attorney or a judge read through it. They had the entirety of the story, and they could go, okay, I understand everything about why this document is fraud and how this scam occurred. And I think having that aspect where it's simplified in a way that someone can easily read it and understand it, especially someone who maybe has no background when it comes to fraud, it's one of the best tools that can help law enforcement. They're just making it simple. I've done it with I've worked with the companies who have done it with credit cards. I've dealt with a lot of, counterfeit credit cards. And to be able to explain a counterfeit credit card, it used to take an entire paragraph. But there was, a tool that we were able to use that said, here's a picture of the credit card, front and back. Here's the number that's supposed to be on it. Here's the number that's on the magnetic stripe. And here's a simple explanation of why it is. And it was like a one-liner. This is why it's fraud. You can look at the picture yourself and you can identify it. Made it so much easier, and attorneys loved it. They're like, this makes it so easy for me to explain in court. And so it's having something simplified helps so much.
Yeah, and what I like about that as well is I think it ties into this trend. I've seen more and more police departments, for example, adopting software solutions to help in general enforcement. I think, like Fox Safety comes to mind just in terms of, is this more in terms of network-driven immediate response and detection for on the ground, like vehicles and so on, but also like drone technology. And so I think there's almost like an innovation wave likely occurring in police enforcement as well, which I think is an exciting trend. So yeah, Bree, perhaps this should be a new market for us in terms of working directly with enforcement. Thanks.
A lot of legal teams reaching out to us for help. The exact same thing, proving if the document is trustworthy or fraudulent. So who knows? The future is But I also love how you called out the importance of explainability around like the signals and the fraud that's detected. That's so important to the banks and credit unions we work with because they're making these like high leverage decisions that are either very high value or often regulated. So us as a vendor, it's something that we always really do try to prioritize is making sure we're educating, but also explaining what did we find? How did we find it? What do we think it means?
No, it's a much needed tool when it comes to dealing with and investigating and prosecuting fraud.
Nice. That makes sense. All right, Ronnie, you can ask me your one and I'll squeeze mine in at the end.
So my last question, Mark, was actually on that technology adoption one. Is that innovation wave something that you're seeing on the ground? I think my traditional understanding of it is that for a lot of these like technology solutions, they often existed earlier in the ecosystem. You know, instead of you using that piece of software, the bank would use it and the bank would give you the evidence. Or it'd be like the local city council who would have number plate tracking implemented via cameras. But it seems like those companies are collaborating more now with police enforcement directly. And then one of the reasons why is just that it was earlier, but also it was probably like easier in terms of the procurement process. But curious to hear if you're seeing anything or you think there's something changing here in terms of how police departments are thinking about technology.
I think police departments are completely on board with adopting the technology because it makes the job easier and it makes us better able to identify and stop crime. Because law enforcement traditionally is more reactive than proactive, but new technology allows you to be more proactive and also frees up other resources because now you can get through a process much faster than you used to. So to have those tools to be able to maybe investigate a case faster than you used to and get off to the next case helps because now I could reduce the workload that we're having. So a lot of law enforcement agencies around the country are adopting these technologies to better help keep the community safe and to move forward with cases at a better pace. And I would say the biggest thing that I see with the tools that law enforcement uses, and this will be just advice, I guess, from my end from law enforcement, having a simplified user interface is one of the best things you can do for law enforcement. I can tell you right now, law enforcement likes things very simple. I've tested tools that were made by like just the software like engineer. And of course they're like, hey, you can do all these great things. Great, but it takes me 15 steps to do the one thing that I want to do. If you can make it do this one thing very simply, then this would be the perfect tool. But if I have to go through 15 steps, or if it's very hard to explain to someone who maybe doesn't use technology that much, then it makes it harder for law enforcement to adopt. Yeah.
Very good point in the UI and something that we've seen as well in terms of like enterprise adoption. Like for folks in the front line, like they have so many other constraints and time pressure and bandwidth and like other things to do that like when they need to do something with us, it needs to be simple and quick and like seamless in their workflows. And yeah, I mean, I think just in general comment, like I think it's a very exciting time in terms of police enforcement for this reason. I'll be watching closely and it's great to see that this is occurring behind the scenes. I'm sure there's lots of leadership required to implement this. So yeah, it's awesome.
Cool. All right. We're going to wrap up with our last question for you, Mark. And this show is called Good Question because we think asking the right questions half the battle. So what's a question that you wish more people, whether it's banks, credit union regulators, or even citizens, would ask you about fraud, but almost never do?
Ooh, that is a good question. What do I wish? For me, I wish that more people in the industry who are fraud investigators would not ask how to stop the crime after it happened. I wish they would ask more of how to prevent the scam before it happens. And because I think we've all heard that term, or most of us have heard the term, an ounce of prevention saves like a lifetime of pain kind of thing. I don't know if that's the exact quote, but it's something to that extent. But I wish more people would ask, how is this scam happening? How do I stop this from happening to me? Because most reports of scams, they happen after someone's been scammed or fraud has happened. And now you're trying to do the recovery process. And everyone wants to know, how do I recover from it? Okay, ask me, how do you stop it? And so you don't even have to worry about the recovery process.
Yeah.
And I think that's the more important question that I wish a lot of banks would ask. I wish they ask, how do we stop this crime from happening to us? Not how do I help the person, my client, recover? How do I maintain my client because they become a victim of fraud? How do I rebuild that trust? Don't lose the trust in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. And if you can do that beforehand and show them that, hey, if we can stop you from being a victim in the first place, you don't have to worry about anything else. I think that's the more important side of it. And that's why I do what I do. That's something you mentioned before I could Fraud Hero. I started Fraud Hero because as a detective, by the time I got a case, it was too late sometimes. Many times it was too late. I couldn't get the money back. Maybe I could find the suspect. Maybe I couldn't. Maybe they went to jail. Maybe they didn't. And it was just this very tough thing to talk to a victim and say, I'm sorry I can't get your money back. I'm sorry this person's not going to go to jail. I know they harmed you. But I want to be able to stop it before it started. If I can help you with the education and awareness of stopping the scam before it starts, then we're in a much better place. And that's why I want to do what I do. And plus, being in law enforcement and dealing with these cases, I see these cases way before they hit the news. When someone 6 years now says, oh, this new scam is happening. Like, that scam was happening 4 or 5 years ago. Is being able to get that knowledge out to the people and say, let me stop it before it starts.
I think the work you are doing is so meaningful, Mark, and is one of the most important steps of just like creating a space for education and collaboration and communication around all of these topics. So I think I speak for many in the fraud fighting community that we're extremely grateful for the insights that you're willing to share. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us today. We could have talked to you all day. I think
I could talk all day.
For another episode. Thanks, Ronan, of course, for joining us again. And thank you so much to our listeners. Remember to follow us on YouTube and Spotify to find other episodes of the podcast. And as always, keep asking good questions. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.